So, as you know, the Republican plan right now is to repeal the Affordable Care Act without a replacement and to have all of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act, or at least most of them. We don't know exactly quite yet what it's going to be. Repeal itself sometime down the road, 2 years, 3 years down the road. However, there is one element that will get repealed immediately. And that is the two taxes that affect those making over $200,000 a year as individuals, $250,000 a year as a couple, will amount to a $346 billion tax cut over the course of 10 years. This is based upon the CBO report of the 2015 legislation that the Republicans had passed, the repeal legislation, which, of course, Barack Obama vetoed. They will get a Medicare tax cut, and they will get basically a capital gains tax cut. So that will go into effect immediately. The rest of the stuff, they're just going to hope it works out. So there you have it. That's an added benefit for the Republicans to give that major, major tax cut, which, of course, you know, the promise was any tax cuts we give, we're going to offset, which, of course, they're not going to do. I don't really particularly care about the offset as much as this tax. I think, it's just another way to maintain more inequality. But here's the thing that's going to make what the Republicans need to do down the road that much more difficult for them. And this is where the Democrats have to stay strong. And this is one of those times where I really do think that, yes, they should not bend. To reinstitute their replacement, if it is in any way going to provide what the Affordable Care Act provides in terms of health insurance for those people on Medicaid or subsidies for those people who can't afford it on the private market, they're going to have to come up with money to do those things. And now the money's going away. So in that replacement that the Republicans think they're going to come up with, it's going to have to involve a major tax increase. And that's going to make it extremely toxic for the Republicans to do. They're going to need the Democrats to join them. They're going to need the Democrats to join them so they can blame the tax cut on the Democrats. So for people who ask me, what should I write to my senators right now? I think you can write to them about seat Merrick Garland, pressure Joe, all of these things, these sort of last-ditch effort things, fine and dandy. Fight against the Trump nominees, and they're going to wage these fights. And they're going to do them to the extent that there's bandwidth that allows them to do it. They can't filibuster because there's no filibuster. But the other thing that you need, if you're going to start writing a letter, you want to write one letter a week. Or you want to write a couple of letters a week. Write to every Democratic senator and House member you can think of and say, do not help the Republicans pass anything to replace Obamacare. Let them do it on their own. They need to own it because they need to own the disaster that they're bringing about. And it's got to start now because it could be a year or two or down the road, but it's got to start now.
I just read a piece of advice from a former congressional staffer who said that you should always call rather than write because they can't ignore they can't ignore either, but they just can't. The volume of writing, emails and paper combined, they just can't get to it. But if you just keep calling, they can't ignore it. They have to do something about it.
Calling is better. I mean, there's actually an equation. I don't know what it is today. I know what it was when I worked. I spent the summer interning, basically just sleeping off a hangover every day for one summer for Congressman Brian Donnelly. But it was, if you got and there was no email at the time, but if you got a letter and it was handwritten, that was worth, I don't know, 300 constituents. If you got a letter and it was, a photocopy or a form letter, that was worth 10 constituents. If you got a phone call, that was worth like 400 constituents. They had an algorithm. I don't know if it was accurate or not, but that's what they used. If someone's willing to make this amount of effort, it represents X number of people. That's basically what it broke down to. But one last thing from this poll about voters. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, during the campaign and at this point, which I think speaks to the failure of the Clinton campaign to raise these issues. And, for people who are like, why you keep hitting on Clinton? But just because, look, I don't care about Hillary Clinton. I have no axe to grind with her or her campaign, but for what it teaches us about moving forward. Okay, among those aware of Medicare proposal, this is basically of those who are aware of Paul Ryan's Medicare proposal, which is to voucher it, to destroy Medicare. I mean, let's face it. If Medicare means a government single-payer health insurance for people over the age of 65, then voucherizing it, basically saying, we'll give you subsidies to go into the private market, that's not Medicare. They're going to call it Medicare, but it's not Medicare. It's killing Medicare. But either way, the percentage of these people who are aware of the proposal to change Medicare into a program that would give future participants a credit towards purchasing private health insurance, the Ryan plan, which I had said over and over again was going to be the first thing that goes through, or that the only health care option is going to be Paul Ryan's Medicare plan. So obvious. Everybody knew it that knew anything about this. They never brought it up. Here it is. Heard about the proposal. Heard anything. Was 18 to 29-year-olds. Only 34. I'm sorry. Wait a second. 51% of people heard of the proposal, either a little bit or a lot. 49% heard nothing about it. 50% of the population had heard nothing about it. Nothing about it. Contemplate that. 49% heard nothing. 39% heard a little. 12% heard a lot. So essentially, you're looking at 90%, 89%, 88% of the population heard nothing or just a little about Paul Ryan's plan to destroy Medicare. How do you go through an election between a Republican and a Democrat with 88% of the population knowing nothing about the proposal to scrap one of the most beloved government programs? How is that not an abject failure by the Democrats? This isn't even about moving anything forward. This is just about retaining what Americans have. mean, this is absurd. This is absurd. This is an absurd failure. And I don't care that they didn't follow Clinton, the media didn't. You got $600 million. Send a goddamn mailer to everybody. There was no attempt. That's the point. There was no attempt because they would not touch Paul Ryan. They expressly said it. The DNC knew it and was complaining about it. They would not touch Paul Ryan. And so, of course, you can't talk about Paul Ryan's plan to destroy Medicare. And if you can't talk about Paul Ryan's plan to destroy Medicare, you can't talk about one of the most tangible implications of electing Donald Trump for literally tens of millions of Americans today, and then tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans tomorrow. This is an abject failure. Abject failure. And frankly, I don't hear any Democrats talking about it now. It's unbelievable. It's just shocking. And frankly, as unbelievable as it is, I totally believe it. I mean, all I do is sit around and read this stuff. And if I was relying on the, literally. And if I was, and I never saw a Democrat talk about it. Never. I never saw anybody who was running talk about it. And you can't talk about it if you're running for Senate if the top of your ticket's not mentioning it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And all they should be doing now is flooding the airwaves talking about Paul Ryan's Medicare proposal.
That was, I remember, in the UK, I aimed this to you, even when Blair had moved labor significantly to the right on financial deregulation, invading Iraq, obviously, particularly on the NHS, National Health Service, which I think there was one poll that said that British people rated that as a greater accomplishment than helping win World War II. Gordon Brown said that there was red lines on funding for NHS, and that helped them win until it imploded after the economic crisis. But that was an area where even in like their worst times electorally, they just maintained that division to the point where, in fact, when Cameron lied about it, but when he actually finally got them back in power, I think they were campaigning on matching Labor's increases in NHS funding.
I mean, this isn't even saying, like, give a set of policies. This is still in line with the idea of, like, you better watch out. You don't want them to take power because this is going to happen. And from their perspective, they were so allergic to criticizing Paul Ryan, so allergic to embracing the second most successful in terms of like appreciation from Americans, I would say, social insurance program the U.S. government has ever engaged in. They were so allergic to embracing it that they couldn't even say, like, they just had to stay with like Trump being just odious personally.
Not good. They ran a sad campaign. That was pathetic.
It was.
I mean, I should have lost easily.
It's true.
It's totally true, but no one wanted to talk about Paul Ryan. Why doesn't everybody call Paul Ryan?
Nobody calls Paul Ryan anymore.
No one calls Paul Ryan anymore. I mean, he wants kids to starve, literally.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Subscribe.